But they were still slash and burn.
No, the Gonds were already proper plough cultivators. There are different types of Gonds. Some, but those I mainly worked in, which were also in Hyderabad state, in a district known as Adilabad district. They also lived in forest areas, but they all had permanent land and cultivated with ploughs and bullocks, and were much more settled than the Reddies. Of course, the Gonds have an old history. There were Gond Rajas, and even in the Middle Ages, Gond states, and they were really in many ways on a level with Hindu population, perhaps economically. So it was quite a different scenario. And also the Gonds were very numerous. There were, alone in Hyderabad, there were nearly 100,000 Gonds. Altogether in India, there are nearly 4 million Gonds. And they are divided into different tribes. For instance, Gonds were also studied by Varya Elvin. I mentioned before his book on the youth dormitories, the Murya Gonds in Basta, which is adjoining to Hyderabad. But each of these tribes has its peculiar system, and these so-called Raj Gonds I studied, they were very different from the Basta Gonds, and in a sense economically more advanced. But they were then also under threat. Namely, their land was quite attractive with rich soils, particularly suitable for growing cotton, black cotton soil. And so there had already begun a process by which Gond land was alienated by more advanced people who came from the plains. The Gonds in the highlands of Adilabad were in the hills, I mean not mountains, but sort of on plateaus and areas a bit different from the big river valleys like the Godavari Valley. And people from there then were infiltrating into the highlands, and the process had begun where the Gonds, some of the Gonds, lost their land.
You describe in your book on the Gonds, because this was a society you worked in perhaps almost longer than any other society, nearly 3 years in their villages you spent. You describe a sort of contradiction between a society which has a very free association of equal peoples combined with a sort of feudal system. I wondered how this society worked.
Well, the feudal system was a kind of remnant from the days of the great Gond Rajas. There was a kind of hereditary aristocracy. At the time when I came to that area, they really had held no more political power, because that was taken over by the administration of the Nizam's government. But the descendants of the former Rajas, they had still some status and not material privileges, but they were still highly respected. They, in the sense that their probably word counted more than that of other people. If there were drawn out disputes, then very often they were referred, then fine people went to one of the Gond Rajas and asked him to meditate. But basically it was an egalitarian society, so that we find that in the villages there were really no status difference, except for these few members of Gond Rajas.
Was this Was this a beautiful area that you were working in? I mean, physically?
Not as beautiful as the Naga Hills, but quite attractive. I mean, at that time there was still a lot of forest, so the villages were enclaves in the forests, and it was, I would say, it was an attractive area without having beautiful scenery.
And what are the people? Are you saying the Gonds?
The Gonds are, one can't say that they are very handsome, but they are quite attractive people. They are not spectacularly dressed or undressed like the Nagas. They were more or less like Indian villagers in dhotis and saris. But they are very pleasant people, and I was quite enjoying my stay there. But at that time there were already endless problems over questions of land and exploitation.
After your purely anthropological research among the Chinchus, Gonds and Reddys, I understand that you were employed by the Hyderabad government in an administrative capacity. I wondered if you could say what you did in that work.
Well, the Hyderabad